Colorado Territory, 1871. The first bullet tore through the evening air just as Victoria O'Hara placed her husband's worn Bible back on the shelf. The second shot followed moments later, accompanied by the pained cry of a man and the panicked whinny of a horse. Victoria froze, her hand still extended toward the bookshelf, as silence once again settled over her isolated homestead. 8 months had passed since typhoid fever had taken Thomas. 8 months of waking alone, working alone, and falling asleep to the hollow echo of her own breathing in an empty cabin. At 32, Victoria had settled into the quiet rhythm of widowhood, believing the rest of her days would be spent in solitude on the small Colorado ranch she and Thomas had built together. But that silence was shattered now. Victoria crossed to the window, peering out into the fading twilight. There, slumped across his saddle, was a man. His horse pawed nervously at the ground, its rider barely clinging to consciousness. Without hesitation, Victoria grabbed her shawl and rushed outside. As she approached, the stranger raised his head weakly. Blood stained his shirt around his left shoulder, and his face was pale beneath several days' growth of beard. "Ma'am," he managed, his voice barely audible. "I apologize for the intrusion." "Save your strength," Victoria replied, already assessing the wound. "Can you stand?" The man nodded, though his grimace betrayed his uncertainty. With Victoria's help, he slid from his saddle, nearly collapsing as his boots hit the ground. She positioned herself beneath his uninjured arm, bearing as much of his weight as her small frame would allow as they made their way toward the cabin. "Name's Russell Collier," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "Most folks call me Russ." "Victoria O'Hara," she replied. "Let's focus on stopping that bleeding, Mr. Collier, and then we can properly introduce ourselves." Inside, she guided him to the kitchen table. "Sit here," she instructed, already gathering supplies. She worked methodically, cutting away his bloodied shirt to reveal the wound. The bullet had torn through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing bone but leaving considerable damage. "You're fortunate," she said, cleansing the wound as gently as possible. "Another inch, and this might have been your last ride." Russ hissed through clenched teeth, but remained remarkably still. "Not the first time I've heard that." Victoria's eyes flickered to his face. In the lamplight, she could better assess her unexpected guest. Despite his pallor, she noted strong features, a straight nose, square jaw shadowed with dark stubble, and eyes the color of weathered denim. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his mid-30s. "Who shot you, Mr. Collier?" she asked, pressing a clean cloth against his shoulder. His expression darkened. "Men who believe I have something they want." "And do you?" "No, ma'am. But convincing them of that has proven difficult." Victoria considered this as she prepared to bandage his wound. "You're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel. But I should warn you, if trouble follows you here, we'll be facing it alone. My nearest neighbor is 3 miles east." Something like regret crossed his features. "I wouldn't have stopped, but my options were limited. I'll be gone by morning." "Don't be foolish," Victoria replied, securing the bandage. "That wound needs time to heal, and you've lost considerable blood. One night won't be sufficient." She helped him to the small bedroom that had once been intended for children, dreams that had never materialized during her 7 years of marriage. The room remained mostly empty save for a narrow bed and a pine dresser. "Rest," she instructed. "I'll look after your horse." Outside, Victoria untacked the exhausted animal, a fine buckskin gelding that bore the marks of hard riding. In the saddlebags, she found few possessions, a change of clothes, a small leather-bound journal, and a carefully wrapped photograph of a young woman holding an infant. Victoria quickly replaced everything, feeling like an intruder. As she led the horse to the small corral beside her own mare, she scanned the horizon. Whoever had shot Russell Collier might still be tracking him. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. Back inside, she checked on her patient. He had fallen into a restless sleep, his forehead beaded with sweat. Fever had set in, a worrying but not unexpected development. Victoria wrung out a cool cloth and placed it on his brow, watching as his features relaxed slightly at her touch. What had she invited into her home? A criminal? A man hunted for just cause? Or someone innocent caught in circumstances beyond his control? The question troubled her as she settled into the rocking chair by the hearth, her husband's shotgun across her lap. Whatever the answer, she had committed to helping this stranger, and Victoria O'Hara had never been one to abandon a commitment once made. Morning revealed a man in the grip of fever. Victoria spent the day alternating between her usual chores and tending to her patient, coaxing water and broth between his cracked lips, changing compresses, and redressing his wound. When he spoke, it was in fragmented sentences that revealed little beyond his immediate discomfort. By the third day, Victoria's concern had deepened into genuine worry. The wound showed no signs of infection, yet Russ remained caught in fever's grasp, occasionally calling out names she didn't recognize: Sarah, Joseph, and most frequently, Caroline. It was during these fevered moments that pieces of his story emerged. He spoke of promises broken, of failure, of a desperate search for redemption. Victoria listened, though she knew these were confidences he would never have shared while lucid. On the fourth morning, she awoke to find him watching her from the bedroom doorway, pale but clear-headed. "You should be resting," she said, rising quickly from the rocking chair where she had dozed off. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough," he replied, though he leaned heavily against the doorframe. "I need to continue on." Victoria crossed the room, guiding him back toward the bed with a firm but gentle hand. "The only place you're continuing to is this bed, Mr. Collier. The fever's broken, but you're still weak as a newborn colt." Surprisingly, he didn't resist. Once seated on the edge of the bed, he looked up at her with an expression that mingled gratitude with something she couldn't quite name. "You've shown me more kindness than I deserve," he said quietly. Victoria busied herself adjusting his pillows. "I haven't yet decided what you deserve, Mr. Collier, since you've told me precious little about yourself or the circumstances that brought you bleeding to my doorstep." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." He settled back against the pillows. "I was a deputy marshal in Kansas. Was tracking a group of men who've been robbing banks across 3 territories." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "And now you're the one being pursued?" His expression darkened. "The men I was tracking killed my partner 6 months ago. Joseph was more than just a fellow lawman. He was my wife's brother." "I'm sorry," Victoria said softly, understanding loss all too well. "After Joseph died, I became obsessed with finding them. Followed them beyond my jurisdiction, ignored orders to return. Eventually, the marshal had no choice but to revoke my badge." Russ paused, his gaze distant. "I kept tracking them anyway. 2 weeks ago, I finally caught up with them near Denver. And they shot you." He nodded. "I underestimated them. They recognized me before I could make my move. I managed to escape, but not before one of them put a bullet in my shoulder." Victoria considered this. "So you're no longer a marshal, pursuing men outside the law?" "I know how it sounds," Russ admitted. "But these men killed Joseph, left his wife Sarah a widow with a young son. I promised Caroline, my wife, that I would see justice done." His voice caught. "Before she died last winter." Understanding dawned on Victoria. The names from his fevered dreams, Joseph, Sarah, Caroline, were not random utterances, but pieces of his fractured heart. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said gently. Russ nodded, his grief evident but contained. "Pneumonia. Quick and merciless." A moment of silence stretched between them, a shared recognition of loss that needed no further words. "Rest today," Victoria finally said. "Tomorrow, if you're stronger, we can discuss your departure." But the decision was taken from them when, shortly after midday, the sound of approaching horses broke the stillness. Victoria was in the garden, harvesting late summer vegetables, while Russ rested inside. She straightened, shielding her eyes against the sun, and counted 3 riders approaching from the east. Her heart quickened. Visitors were rare at her isolated homestead, and the timing was too coincidental to be chance. Victoria dropped her basket and hurried inside. Russ was already on his feet, buckling his gun belt with his good arm. "They found me," he said grimly. "You're in no condition to fight," Victoria countered, reaching for her husband's shotgun. "This isn't your battle, Mrs. O'Hara." "It became mine when I pulled that bullet from your shoulder," she replied, checking the shotgun's chambers. "Besides, this is my home, and I'll not have violence within its walls if I can prevent it." Before he could protest further, she moved to the door. "Stay inside," she instructed. "Let me speak with them first." Stepping onto the porch, Victoria positioned herself with the shotgun visible but not aimed. The 3 men reined in about 20 yards from the cabin, assessing her with undisguised surprise. The leader, a lean man with a pockmarked face, touched the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "Afternoon, ma'am. Didn't expect to find a lady out here all alone." "I'm not alone," Victoria replied evenly. "And you're trespassing on private property." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're looking for a friend who might have passed this way. Tall fellow, dark hair. Would have been riding a buckskin. No one matching that description has come by here," Victoria said, meeting his gaze steadily. The man exchanged glances with his companions. "Mind if we have a look around? Our friend was injured. We're concerned about him." "I mind very much," Victoria replied. "As I said, this is private property. Your concern isn't welcome here." The leader's facade of politeness slipped. "Listen, lady, we know he's here. We followed his trail straight to your door. Now, you can step aside." Or, the cabin door opened behind Victoria, and Russ stepped out, his revolver drawn. "Or you can leave now, Maddox, while you still have the chance." The tension in the air thickened. Victoria remained still, the shotgun ready, as Maddox's face twisted with hatred. "Collier," he spat. "Still alive, I see. Disappointed?" Russ moved to stand beside Victoria, his presence steady despite his weakened condition. Maddox's eyes narrowed. "You've been a thorn in my side long enough. Time to finish what we started in Denver." 3 against 1. Victoria interjected. Those hardly seem like favorable odds for men who pride themselves on their reputation. Maddox's gaze shifted to her, reassessing. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am. Step aside." "I'll do no such thing," Victoria replied. "You're on my land, threatening a guest under my protection. That very much concerns me." A tense silence followed, broken only by the nervous shifting of horses. Victoria could feel Russ beside her, his breathing controlled but labored. He wouldn't last long in a gunfight, not in his condition. "We'll be back, Collier," Maddox finally said. "With more men. And next time, we won't be so polite." He turned his horse, but not before adding, "Shame to involve a lady in your mess. But that's always been your way, hasn't it? Leaving widows in your wake." The barb struck its intended target. Beside her, Victoria felt Russ stiffen. "You leave Mrs. O'Hara out of this," he growled. "This is between us." Maddox merely smiled, a cold expression that promised future reckoning. With a nod to his companions, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and unspoken threats hanging in the air. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Victoria lower the shotgun, her hands trembling slightly with delayed reaction. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "Yes." Russ's voice was grim. "I need to leave. Now." Victoria turned to face him, noting the pallor beneath his tan and the way he leaned against the porch post for support. "In your condition, you won't make it 5 miles before they catch you." "I won't bring their violence to your door," he insisted. "It's already at my door," she countered. "And I'd rather face it with someone at my side than wonder if I send a man to his death." She took a deep breath, making a decision that would forever alter the quiet rhythm of her widowhood. "We have until nightfall to prepare." Inside, they formed a plan born of necessity and limited options. Victoria knew the surrounding land intimately, every ridge, creek, and hidden draw. Together, they plotted an escape route that would take advantage of the coming darkness and her knowledge of the terrain. As Victoria gathered supplies, Russ attempted to dissuade her one final time. "You could claim I forced you at gunpoint," he suggested. "Once we're gone, you could return. Start over." Victoria paused, a jar of preserved peaches in her hand. "And what would I be returning to, Mr. Collier? An empty cabin? Days filled with nothing but memories and regret." She placed the jar in her satchel with deliberate care. "I buried those possibilities with my husband. I won't resurrect them now." Something shifted in Russ's expression, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "Victoria," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. "You deserve better than being forced from your home because of my mistakes." "We rarely get what we deserve in this life, good or ill," she replied. "We get what we choose and what we make of those choices." She met his gaze directly. "I'm choosing this." As dusk descended, they led their horses quietly from the corral, Victoria's mare and Russ's buckskin loaded with only essential supplies. They would travel light and fast, following game trails that Victoria assured would be invisible in the darkness. "We'll head north, then cut east through the high country," she explained as they mounted. There's an old trapper's cabin near Silver Creek where we can rest. From there, we can reach Willow Springs in 2 days. Russ nodded, adjusting his position to minimize strain on his injured shoulder. And then, Victoria hadn't thought beyond immediate survival. And then we decide our next move. They rode away from the cabin without looking back, 2 silhouettes merging with the gathering darkness. Behind them lay certainty, and before them only questions. Yet Victoria felt a curious lightness in her chest, the unexpected liberation of choosing action over acceptance. Their first night on the trail, they made camp in a sheltered hollow, building only the smallest of fires to ward off the autumn chill. Victoria changed Russ's bandages by firelight, noting with relief that the wound was healing cleanly. "You have a healer's touch," he commented as she secured the fresh dressing. "Necessity," she replied. "Out here, you learn to tend wounds or suffer the consequences." "Is that why you helped me that night?" Russ asked. "Necessity." Victoria considered this as she packed away her medical supplies. "No," she finally said. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Because I couldn't stand by and watch a man die when I had the means to prevent it, even knowing it might cost you everything." "I didn't know that then," she pointed out. "But would it have changed my decision?" "I don't think so." She looked up at him. "Would you have done differently in my place?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features. "No. But then, I've always been a poor judge when it comes to self-preservation." This drew a small laugh from Victoria, perhaps her first since Thomas's death. The sound surprised her, like discovering an object long thought lost. "Tell me about your husband," Russ said, settling back against his saddle. The request caught her off guard. "Why?" "Because he's part of who you are," Russ replied simply. "And because I've shared my ghost with you. Seems only fair you introduce me to yours." Victoria fed a small branch to the fire, watching the flames consume it before responding. "Thomas was a good man. Kind. Patient. We met in St. Louis, married after a brief courtship, and came west with dreams of building something that was ours alone." She paused, memories surfacing like stones in a stream. "He loved this land, saw possibility where others saw only hardship." "He sounds like a wise man." "He was," Victoria agreed, "though perhaps not in his choice of wife. He deserved someone who could give him children, a legacy." Russ studied her across the fire. "That wasn't possible." Victoria shook her head. "We tried for years. Eventually, the doctor in Denver confirmed what I had begun to suspect. The fault lay with me." She hadn't spoken of this to anyone, yet here, under a vast sky scattered with stars, the words came easily. "Did he blame you?" "Never," Victoria said softly. "Not once. But I blamed myself enough for both of us." Russ was quiet for a moment. "My Caroline and I had a similar sorrow. She lost 2 babies before they were born. The doctor warned that trying again might kill her." "I'm sorry," Victoria said, understanding the particular ache of that loss. "We had made peace with it," Russ continued. "We're discussing adoption when she fell ill." His voice roughened. "She made me promise 2 things before she died: to look after her brother's widow and son, and to find happiness again." A bitter smile touched his lips. "I failed at both." Victoria reached across the small space between them, her hand finding his in the firelight. "You haven't failed, Russell. You're still fighting." His fingers tightened around hers. "For what? I sometimes wonder." "For justice," she replied. "For family. For a future you can't yet imagine." They sat like that for a long moment, connected by touch and shared understanding, until Victoria gently withdrew her hand. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." As she settled into her bedroll, Victoria was acutely aware of Russ just a few feet away. It had been years since she had been so physically close to a man other than her husband. The realization brought a complicated surge of emotions: guilt, confusion, and something else she wasn't prepared to name. They reached the trapper's cabin by midday the following day. The structure was crude but intact, offering shelter from the increasingly cloudy sky that threatened rain. Inside, they found a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a single bed frame covered with a dusty bearskin. "Not exactly the Palmer house," Russ commented wryly, surveying their accommodations. Victoria set about clearing cobwebs and dust. "It's shelter, and unlikely to be discovered." They established a routine over the next 2 days as Russ's strength gradually returned. Victoria hunted small game and gathered edible plants while Russ repaired the cabin's leaky roof and reinforced its single door. They spoke little during daylight hours, each focused on their respective tasks, but evenings brought conversation that grew increasingly personal. On their third night in the cabin, with rain pattering steadily against the newly repaired roof, Victoria finally asked the question that had lingered since their escape. "What will you do once we reach Willow Springs?" Russ looked up from cleaning his revolver, his expression somber. "Wire the territorial marshal's office. Report Maddox's location." And then, he sighed, setting the gun aside. "I don't know. I resigned my position, essentially abandoned my duty. There will be consequences. But you were pursuing men who killed your partner, your brother-in-law. Outside my jurisdiction, against direct orders," Russ clarified. "The badge comes with rules, Victoria. Rules I chose to break. For justice," she pointed out. "For vengeance," he corrected quietly. "There's a difference, though I lost sight of it somewhere along the way." Victoria considered this as she stirred the pot of rabbit stew simmering over the fire. "And what of Sarah and her son? Your promise to Caroline?" Pain flickered across his features. "Sarah remarried 6 months ago. A good man, a banker in Kansas City. They've moved east, beyond the reach of Joseph's ghost." He paused. "And mine. I'm sorry," Victoria said, understanding that this represented yet another loss for him. Russ shrugged, though the gesture lacked conviction. "She deserves happiness. Joseph would have wanted that for her." "And what do you want for yourself?" Victoria asked, serving the stew into 2 tin plates. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "For months, my only focus has been finding Maddox and his gang." And now, he accepted the plate she offered, his fingers brushing hers. "Now, I find myself thinking there might be something after vengeance. Something worth building rather than destroying." His gaze held hers for a long moment, and Victoria felt heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's warmth. She looked away first, suddenly conscious of their isolation, the single bed they had been taking turns using while the other slept on a pallet by the fire. "What about you?" Russ asked, his voice gentle. "What awaits you after Willow Springs?" Victoria poked at her stew, considering. "I don't know. I can't return to the homestead, not with Maddox and his men aware of its location. You could sell it, start fresh elsewhere." The suggestion pained her more than she expected. "That land holds all I have left of Thomas, of the life we built together." "Land is just land, Victoria," Russ said softly. "The memories you carry within you. The love you shared isn't contained in logs and acres." "Speaking from experience?" she asked, a slight edge to her voice. "Yes," he replied simply. "I carried Caroline with me through Kansas, Colorado, and Wyoming. Not once did I feel her presence more strongly for being near her grave or our home." His expression softened. "She's here," he touched his chest, "not there." The truth of his words resonated, though Victoria wasn't ready to fully accept them. Thomas was indeed in her heart, but the homestead represented more than memories. It was tangible proof of their shared dream, their legacy in the absence of children. "Perhaps," she conceded, "but it's all I have left to show for 7 years of marriage." Russ studied her across the table. "Is that what you believe? That without that land, your marriage leaves no mark on this world?" "What else is there?" she asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "You," he said simply. "You are changed because of him, because of your life together. And every life you touch going forward carries that influence." He paused. "Including mine." The declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was prepared to address. Victoria busied herself with her meal, though her appetite had fled. Later that night, as Russ slept on the pallet by the dying fire, Victoria lay awake in the narrow bed, his words circling in her mind. Was he right? Did she carry Thomas's legacy within her, independent of the land they had worked together? And what of this unexpected connection with Russell Collier? In the space of a week, he had disrupted the careful isolation she had constructed around herself, challenging her assumptions about her future, about what remained possible. Morning brought clearing skies and the decision to continue to Willow Springs. They packed their few belongings in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. As Victoria secured her saddlebags, Russ approached, holding something in his hand. "I want you to have this," he said, extending his palm to reveal a simple silver band. his wedding ring. Victoria stared at it in confusion. I don't understand. If we're separated in Willow Springs, he explained, this might help you. It's valuable enough to secure passage wherever you need to go, or lodging until you decide your next step. I can't accept that, Victoria protested. It's your connection to Caroline. Russ smiled, sad but resolute. Like I said last night, she's here. He touched his chest again, not in objects. Besides, she would approve. She always believed in helping others. When Victoria still hesitated, he took her hand and pressed the ring into her palm, closing her fingers around it. Please, let me do this one thing for you, after all you've risked for me. The weight of the ring in her hand felt significant, a transfer of trust more than metal. Victoria nodded, slipping it into her pocket. Thank you. They reached Willow Springs by mid-afternoon, the small town bustling with more activity than Victoria had seen in months. They agreed to separate temporarily, Russ to send his telegram to the marshal's office, Victoria to secure rooms at the hotel and purchase supplies. The Prairie Rose Hotel offered clean, modest accommodations. Victoria requested adjoining rooms, ignoring the clerk's curious glance at her travel-worn appearance and lack of luggage beyond saddlebags. The weight of Russ's ring in her pocket provided reassurance as she paid in advance for 3 nights. In her room, Victoria indulged in the luxury of a proper bath, washing away the dust and strain of their journey. Afterward, she examined her reflection in the spotted mirror, noting changes beyond the physical. The woman who gazed back at her seemed more vibrant, more present than the hollow-eyed widow who had moved through life like a ghost on her isolated homestead. A knock at the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. Victoria? It's Russ. She secured her robe more tightly before opening the door. Russ stood on the threshold, freshly shaven and wearing a new shirt, though his expression was troubled. What is it? She asked, immediately alert to his tension. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I sent the telegram. The marshal's office responded immediately. They've been searching for me for weeks. Is that good news or bad? Both, Russ said, running a hand through his damp hair. They want my help in capturing Maddox and his gang. Apparently, they've hit 3 more banks since Denver. He paused. But they've also made it clear that I'll face disciplinary action afterward. Victoria absorbed this. So you're reinstated? Temporarily, he clarified. Enough to give my pursuit official sanction. What happens next? A marshal and 2 deputies are already en route from Denver. They'll arrive tomorrow. Russ hesitated. They want me to lead them back to your homestead. That's where Maddox was last seen. The implications were clear. So I can't go home, Victoria said quietly. Not until Maddox is captured. Russ's expression softened with regret. I'm sorry, Victoria. I never meant to cost you your home. You didn't, she replied. Maddox and his men did that. She crossed to the window, gazing out at the unfamiliar town. How long will the pursuit take? Impossible to say. Days, weeks. Maddox is cunning. He won't be easily found if he suspects we're looking for him. Victoria nodded, a plan forming in her mind. Then I'll wait here until it's safe to return. Or until I decide where to go next. Victoria, Russ began, then faltered. He moved to stand beside her at the window. When this is over, when Maddox is captured and I've faced whatever consequences await me, may I call on you? The question, tentative yet direct, caught her by surprise. She turned to face him, suddenly aware of their proximity, of the earnest hope in his eyes. To what end, Russell? She asked softly. To discover if what I've begun to feel these past days is real, he replied, his voice low and certain. To see if there might be a future for us beyond survival and escape. Victoria felt a flutter of something long dormant awakening within her. Possibility, hope, desire. Yet caution tempered her response. We've known each other under extraordinary circumstances. What seems meaningful now might fade in ordinary life. Or it might grow stronger, he countered. I only ask for the chance to find out. She studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet strength that had drawn her from the beginning. Yes, she finally said. You may call on me. Relief and something deeper transformed his expression. His hand rose to gently touch her cheek. Thank you. For a moment, Victoria thought he might kiss her, and part of her wished he would. But Russ stepped back, respecting the boundary of propriety between them. The marshal will arrive on tomorrow's noon train, he said. Will you see me off? Victoria nodded, grateful for his restraint, yet somehow disappointed by it. I'll be there. After he returned to his room, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, her emotions in turmoil. She had spent 8 months building walls around her heart, accepting solitude as her future. Now those walls were crumbling, and the prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. That night, she dreamed of Thomas. Not as she had often dreamed of him, pale and wasted from typhoid, but strong and smiling as he had been in the early years of their marriage. In the dream, he stood in the doorway of their cabin, looking out at the land they had worked together. It was never about the land, Vic, he said, using the endearment he had favored in life. It was about building something lasting together. But we didn't finish, she replied in the strange logic of dreams. There's so much left undone. Thomas turned to her, his smile gentle. Your story isn't over. Mine is, but yours continues. He gestured beyond the cabin, where in the dream's landscape, a new horizon beckoned. Go build something new. Victoria awoke with tears on her cheeks, but a curious peace in her heart. The dream lingered, not as a visitation, but as her own subconscious giving her permission to move forward. The following day, she met Russ at the train station. The marshal, a grizzled man named Hargrove, and his deputies greeted her with respectful nods as Russ introduced her. Mrs. O'Hara has provided invaluable assistance, Russ explained. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here. Marshal Hargrove touched the brim of his hat. Then the law owes you a debt, ma'am. We'll do our best to see Maddox and his gang brought to justice so you can return to your home. Thank you, Marshal, Victoria replied. I appreciate your efforts. As the train whistle sounded, Russ pulled her slightly aside, his expression serious. If anything changes, if you decide to leave Willow Springs, wire the marshal's office in Denver. They'll get word to me. Victoria nodded. Be careful, Russell. Maddox strikes me as a man who values revenge above self-preservation. I will. His hand found hers, squeezing gently. Wait for me. The question contained multitudes. Wait for his return. Wait for justice to be served. Wait for the possibility they had only begun to explore. I will, she promised, returning the pressure of his fingers. The goodbye was necessarily brief, witnessed as it was by the marshal and his men. But as Russ boarded the train, the look that passed between them contained all that remained unspoken. Hope, promise, and the spark of something that might, given time and care, grow into love. The days stretched into weeks. Victoria established a routine in Willow Springs, taking a room in a boarding house and finding employment at the town's small library. The work suited her, providing both income and the comfort of books, a passion she had indulged when possible even on the isolated homestead. Word came sporadically through telegrams from the marshal's office. Maddox and his gang had been tracked across the territory, always seeming one step ahead of capture. Victoria read between the terse lines of official communication, sensing the frustration and danger that accompanied the pursuit. 6 weeks after Russ's departure, Victoria received a letter bearing his familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it in the privacy of her room. My dear Victoria, forgive the delayed correspondence. Our pursuit has taken us far afield, and opportunities to write have been scarce. We believe Maddox is making for the Wyoming border, hoping to lose us in less settled country. Marshal Hargrove is determined, however, and I find my respect for him growing daily despite our complicated history. I think often of our time together, both the perilous journey and the quiet moments of connection that meant more to me than I could express then. In the chaos of this pursuit, those memories provide a stillness I've not known since Caroline's death. There is much I wish to say to you, Victoria, but such sentiments deserve to be expressed in person rather than on paper that may never reach its destination. I carry your image with me. It gives me purpose beyond vengeance, a reason to see this through and return. Yours. Russell. Victoria pressed the letter to her chest, emotions welling. The measured words contained careful restraint, yet she sensed the deeper currents beneath them. Russell Collier was a man transformed from the embittered widower who had arrived bleeding on her doorstep, and she was no longer the withdrawn widow who had pulled him from his saddle. 3 days later, News arrived that shattered the fragile peace she had constructed in Willow Springs. Maddox and his gang had been cornered in an abandoned mining camp. In the ensuing gunfight, 2 deputies had been wounded, Maddox had been killed, and Russell Collier had been shot. The telegram from Marshal Hargrove was brutally concise. Collier wounded, stop condition serious, stop transported to Denver hospital, stop, will advise further, stop. Victoria didn't hesitate. She packed her few belongings, withdrew her savings, and purchased a ticket on the next train to Denver. The journey passed in a blur of anxiety, her mind constructing and discarding scenarios, each more terrible than the last. In Denver, she made her way directly to the hospital, a red brick building near the center of the growing city. At the reception desk, she hesitated only briefly before stating, "I'm here to see Russell Collier. I'm his fiancée." The lie came easily, necessary to gain access to a patient who might not be receiving visitors beyond immediate family. The nurse's sympathetic expression did nothing to calm Victoria's racing heart. "Third floor, East Wing," the woman directed. "The doctor just finished his rounds, so you've arrived at a good time." Victoria climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, rehearsing what she would say, how she would react regardless of what condition she found him in. She had lost one man she cared for to illness. She would not lose another without at least saying goodbye. The ward was quiet, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto rows of beds. A nurse directed her to the far end, where a screen provided some privacy around a single bed. Hard in her throat, Victoria stepped around the screen and found Russell sitting up, his left arm in a sling but his color good, his eyes alert. He looked up at her entrance, surprise giving way to joy that transformed his features. "Victoria?" Relief made her lightheaded. She gripped the foot of the bed for support. "You're alive." "Very much so," he confirmed, his smile widening, though the telegram made it sound otherwise. She nodded, still struggling to reconcile her fears with the reality before her. "It said your condition was serious." "It was," Russ acknowledged. "The bullet broke my collarbone and nicked a lung. But that was 4 days ago. I've been improving steadily since." Victoria moved closer, studying him with the expert eye of someone who had nursed him once before. There was pain in the lines around his mouth, fatigue in the shadows beneath his eyes, but his gaze was clear and focused entirely on her. "You came," he said softly, wonderingly. "Of course I came," she replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "How could I not?" His hand found hers, warm and solid and alive. "The nurse said my fiancée had arrived." I thought she was confused. Victoria blushed slightly. "A small deception. They might not have let me see you otherwise." "A fortuitous lie," Russ said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Though perhaps not entirely a deception, depending on your answer to a question I've been rehearsing since Wyoming." Victoria's breath caught. "Russell, hear me out," he requested gently. "When I was lying in that mining camp, blood soaking my shirt for the second time in 2 months, I had a moment of perfect clarity. I saw my life stretching before me in 2 distinct paths, one empty and hollow, consumed by the past, the other filled with possibility, with growth, with love." His grip on her hand tightened. "Both paths led back to you, Victoria. To the woman who saved not just my life, but my capacity to imagine a future worth living." Tears blurred Victoria's vision. "We barely know each other," she protested weakly. "We know what matters," Russ countered. "We've seen each other at our most vulnerable and our most courageous. We've shared loss and danger and quiet moments of truth beside a fire." He paused. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer, only that you consider the possibility of building something new together once I'm released from this hospital and have settled my affairs with the marshal's office." Victoria studied their joined hands, overwhelmed by the direction her life had taken since that fateful evening when gunshots had shattered her solitude. "What of my homestead?" she asked, though it wasn't really the question uppermost in her mind. "It's yours, whether you choose to return to it or sell it," Russ replied. "Maddox is dead, his remaining gang members in custody. There's no danger there anymore." He hesitated. "But I won't pretend I'm suited to the life of a rancher, Victoria. My skills lie elsewhere. And where would we make our home?" She was considering it now, allowing herself to imagine the possibility. "I've been offered a position as sheriff in a growing town near the Kansas border. It would be a fresh start for both of us." His expression turned earnest. "I'm not asking you to replace Caroline. just as I would never try to take Thomas's place in your heart. But perhaps we can honor their memory by finding happiness together. Victoria thought of her dream, of Thomas urging her to build something new. She thought of the quiet cabin where she had expected to live out her days alone, and of the unexpected joy she had found in Russ's company despite danger and uncertainty. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Russ repeated, as if uncertain he had heard correctly. Victoria smiled, the last vestiges of guilt and hesitation falling away. Yes, I will marry you, Russell Collier. Not immediately. We both need time to properly say goodbye to our past lives. But yes, I choose the path of possibility. The joy that illuminated his face was answer enough, but he drew her closer, his good arm encircling her waist. May I kiss you now, Victoria O'Hara, to seal this agreement between us? In response, she leaned forward, bridging the final distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle reverence that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Russ kept her close. I should get shot more often if this is the result. Victoria laughed, the sound unfettered and free. Don't you dare. I've pulled enough bullets from you to last a lifetime. 6 months later, Victoria stood on the porch of a modest house in the newly established town of Riverside, watching as Russ dismounted after his daily rounds as sheriff. The spring sunshine gilded his hair and broad shoulders as he secured his horse and strode toward her, his smile widening with each step. They had been married 3 months, in a small ceremony attended by Marshal Hargrove and a few new friends from town. Victoria had sold the homestead, keeping only a few mementos of her life with Thomas, his Bible, their wedding photograph, a quilt his mother had made. The proceeds had helped establish their new home, a comfortable dwelling near enough to town for Russ's duties, yet private enough to suit Victoria's preference for quiet. How was your day, Sheriff Collier? She asked as he climbed the steps to join her. Peaceful, he replied, drawing her into his embrace. Just the way I like it. He kissed her thoroughly, still with the wonder of a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Victoria returned his kiss with equal fervor, marveling at how naturally they had settled into life together, how their separate griefs had gradually transformed into shared joy. I have news, she said when they parted. Russ raised an eyebrow, waiting. The doctor confirmed it today, Victoria continued, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat abdomen. We're going to have a child. The shock on his face was comical, quickly replaced by incandescent happiness. Victoria, he breathed, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. Are you certain? She nodded, her own joy mingled with lingering disbelief. After years of disappointment with Thomas, the pregnancy seemed miraculous, unexpected in the best possible way. Russ dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her midsection, his arms encircling her waist. Thank you, he whispered, though whether to her or to some higher power, Victoria wasn't sure. She ran her fingers through his hair, her heart overflowing. It seems we've been given another chance, Russell. Another beginning. He looked up at her, eyes shining with unshed tears. We've been given more than that, Victoria. We've been given a future. As the sun set over their new hometown, Victoria O'Hara Collier stood in the embrace of her second chance at love, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. From a bullet-riddled evening on a lonely homestead to this moment of perfect joy, their path had been unlikely, dangerous, and ultimately transformative. The lonely widow had indeed saved an injured cowboy, and her kindness, along with courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk her heart again, had truly brought love to their door.